Yeah, g'day YouTube and everyone out there. I hope you're enjoying the book. This different note entirely. So, what I'm going to do is, because when I post something like this, and I got banned from the community channel for posting something like this, so I'm just going to read it. So, this is from the TTAC, which is the Truth About Cancer website. It's called Coronavirus Panic or Pandemic. Alright? And it's by TY and Charlene Bollinger, March 20th, 2020, right? And it's had 3,000 odd Facebook shares. Now, does anyone remember the words that FDR said? The only thing that we have to fear is fear itself. I wonder what he'd say now in the light of the current state of panic over the coronavirus. The coronavirus has absolutely dominated the news for the past couple of weeks. Travel has come to a standstill. States are forcing businesses to close, and some parts of the country are already under quarantine. Millions of people are out of work, and panicked shoppers have left grocery stores bare. Check out the photos of what I took at our local grocery store yesterday, and this was the bread aisle. But most of the other aisles were also barren. It's just a photo basically of the aisle being no food, no nothing on the shelves. If you have been to the grocery store lately, you've probably seen something similar. The impact of our social lives and the global economy has been massive, especially in the first few weeks of March. Major events have been postponed, thousands of businesses have been forced to close, and the stock markets have taken a major blow. In an attempt to help slow the spread of a virus, health officials have asked people to practice social distancing, where we avoid group events and contact with one another as best as we can. Several major sport leagues, including the NBA, the MLB, and the NHL and Champions League, have postponed their seasons indefinitely. The NCAA basketball tournament, known as the March Madness, was originally going to play the games without fans in attendance, but now decided to scrap the tournament altogether. More recently, state and local governments have issued emergency orders banning bars, restaurants, gyms, and other social gathering places from remaining open. Many of these went into effect at midnight March the 17th, dealing a huge blow to the hospitality industry just before St. Patrick's Day. In the midst of all that's happening in the world, there is one underlying disease: fear. People are panicking, begging the government to protect them and save them. But here's a few questions that a few people seem to be asking. Do we have enough data to support this panic? In a recent article by John P.A. Lonelidge, Professor of Medicine of the Epidemiology at the Population Health and the Biomedical Data Science of the Statistics at Stanford University, he made some good points. The current coronavirus disease, COVID-19, has been called a once-in-a-century pandemic, but it may also be a once-in-a-century evidence fiasco. The data collected so far on how many people are infected and how the epidemic is evolving is absolutely, utterly unreliable. Given the limited testing to date, some deaths and probability the vast major of infections due to SARS-CoV-2 are being missed. We don't know if we are failing to capture these infections by a factor of 3 or 300. 3 months after the outbreak emerged, most countries, including the US, lack the ability to test a large number of people, and no countries have reliable data on the prevalence of the virus in its representative random sample of the general population. He continued, in absence of data, prepare for the worst. Reasoning leads to extreme measures of social distancing and lockdowns. If we decide to jump off a cliff, we need some data to inform us about the rationale of such action and the chances of landing somewhere safe. Regardless of whether you have enough data or not, it seems like the mention of the V word is getting used more and more frequently. Make no mistake, a coronavirus vaccine is coming. It will be mandatory. Will anyone who refuses the vaccine be ostracized from society, or B, forbidden from travelling. In the LA Times article from March the 18th, they tell the story of Edward Jenner, crediting him with saving the most lives ever with the smallpox vaccine. Then they claim that the anti-vaxxers have forgotten about how successful the smallpox vaccine was. According to the article, this collective amnesia has allowed for the rise of the anti-vaccine movement, whose irresponsible adherents believe vaccines against the lines of the pockets of the big pharma. They ignore the fact that the smallpox vaccine was so overwhelmingly successful at eradicating the disease that is no longer routinely given. Are anti-vaxxers ready to start believing in vaccines again? Please allow me to retort to this wildly inaccurate article. Vaccines became mandatory in England in 1853, and by 1857 fines and imprisonment awaited the people who refused to be vaccinated against smallpox. And as Dr. Humphreys just mentioned, one smallpox vaccination became mandatory in England. Massive epidemics began to occur. According to the official figures of the Register General England, between 1857 and 1859, there were over 14,000 deaths from smallpox. Then between 1863 and 1865, there were over 20,000 smallpox deaths. Then a few years later, there was almost 45,000 smallpox deaths between 1870 and 1872. Let's just say that based on those death statistics, that smallpox vaccine was far from overwhelmingly successful, as the article claims. I would call it an abysmal failure. According to Dr. Suzanne Humphreys in her book Dissolving Illusions, an interesting phenomenon occurred in the city called Lancaster in England, which saw a massive outbreak of smallpox in 1871, despite an almost 100% vaccine rate. Over the next 15 years, the smallpox vaccine was mandatory, and they continued to have outbreaks. However, on March the 23rd, 1885, what became known as the Great Demonstration against the mandatory vaccination took place in Lancaster. Leicester. I just gotta call it Leicester. Fuck it. The residents of Leicester were fed up and held a rally with over 80,000 people participating. They protested mandatory vaccines and actually won their freedom of choice. Over the next 8 years, the vaccination rate went approximately 95% down to only 5%. During that period, if someone had smallpox, everyone in the infected house was placed in strict quarantine, and the house was thoroughly disinfected. And guess what? Guess what happened? The death rates drastically decreased, and there were no more outbreaks. So the lesson we can learn from Lancaster and the smallpox is that the vaccine did not work, but actually caused further outbreaks, whereas quarantine and isolation were successful at mitigating the spread of the disease. Mitigating the spread of the disease, sorry. And while quarantine and isolation are good ideas, what about forced quarantine and isolation? Could that be considered medical martial law? More on that in a moment. The coming coronavirus vaccine. There are a lot of promising natural treatments available to help combat the virus, but nearly the global effort to funding has been dedicated to the development of a vaccine. In 2015, a patent was filed by the Breitbart Institute for the attenuated coronavirus. I'm not sure what that says, I can't see it. But yeah, the application claims that the new virus could be used to create a vaccine for treating and preventing respiratory diseases. The patent was awarded in 2018. Now, the Breitbart Institute is funded by the UK Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, the WHO, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. All of these entities have been loud supporters of mandatory vaccinations and more government control based on health concerns. For several years, Bill Gates has been telling us that a pandemic is coming, and in November of 2019, Collaborating with the World Economic Forum, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation hosted Event 201, where they ran a simulation of a coronavirus pandemic. But the push for the vaccine has even the staunchest vaccine advocates and scientists worried. I understand the importance of accelerating timelines for vaccines in general, but from everything I know, this is not a vaccine to be doing it with. Dr. Peter Holtz, Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine, told Reuters. Holtz worked on developing a vaccine for SARS, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, the coronavirus behind the major 2003 outbreak, and found some vaccinated animals develop more severe disease compared with unvaccinated animals when they were exposed to the virus. There is a risk of the immune enhancement, said Holtz. The way that you reduce the risk is first you show it does not occur in laboratory animals. But the vaccine won't be available for at least a year or so. So in the meantime, we're hearing something like bizarre recommendations like get a flu shot. We're hearing the doctors on TV and major newspapers like the New York Times recommending that you should go get your flu shot vaccine to protect against the coronavirus. Then it just has an article. It shows the New York Times pictured there that says, wash your hands, get a good supply of essentials, medicines, get a flu shot. Experts offer practical tips on how you should get ready for the possible outbreak. There goes the article again. Right. So, a 2017-18 study published in the prestigious journal Vaccine, a peer-reviewed medical journal, revealed that the flu vaccines may increase the risk of infection from other respiratory viruses, including coronavirus, which is a phenomenon known as virus interference. According to the study, vaccine-derived virus interference was significantly associated with the coronavirus. When we look closer at the study, we find this quote, examining the non-influenza viruses specifically, the odds of both coronavirus and human metamorphosis in vaccinated individuals were significantly higher when compared to the unvaccinated individuals, or 1.36 and 1.51 respectively. In other words, the flu shot increases your risk of contracting the coronavirus by 36%. And then it shows you a graph underneath it showing what it's talking about. A recent article in Bloomberg titled 99 of those who died from the virus had other illnesses illustrates an overlooked variable in the corona panic equation. That is, the variable would be the status of the immune system in those who were exposed. The study found the following. More than 99% of Italy's coronavirus fatalities were people that had suffered from previous medical conditions, according to a study by the country's National Health Authority. Moreover, the Rome-based institute has examined medical records of 18% of the country's coronavirus fatalities, finding that there are just 3 victims, or 0.8 of the total, had no previous pathology. Almost half of the victims suffered from at least 3 prior illnesses, and about a fourth had either one of the 2 previous conditions. More than 75% had high blood pressure, 35% had diabetes, and a third suffered from heart disease. The Bloomberg article also pointed out that the primary threat is to the elderly. The average age of someone who died was 79.5, and that the fatality rate may have even been significantly overblown. Rather than 8%, the fatality rate may in fact be closer to the global average of around 2%. This new report challenges much of the global reporting on the topic, which presents a unliteral narrative, which simply being exposed within 6 feet to someone who may have test positive for the virus is life-threatening, independent of one's health status and other precautions one must take, such as supporting one's immune system. Elderly people already taking multiple prescription drugs for chronic diseases are highly susceptible to opportunistic infections due to their chronic conditions. The adverse effects of pharmaceuticals and subsequently weakened the immune system. Below is a table indicating the COVID-19 fatality rate, and then it just shows you what they're saying and shit. On the other city it says fatality rate by age, death by numbers, death by cases. I'll just let you go look at that. I'll put the link in the description. As it is evident, those who are younger than 60 years old have less than 1% chance of death if exposed. What about the PCR test? According to David Crown, a Canadian software and telecommunications engineer with a degree of biology who is an expert in global infections such as SARS, Ebola and flu, the coronavirus pandemic is an irrational panic based on unproven RNA tests called the polymerase chain reaction. In his own words, the coronavirus test is based on a PCR manufacturing technique. When used as a test, it does not produce a positive or negative result, but simply the number of cycles required to detect genetic material. The division between positive and negative is an arbitrary number of cycles chosen by the testers. If positive means infected and negative means uninfected, then there are cases of people going from infected to uninfected and back to infected again in a couple of days. In layman's terms, Mr. Crow suggested that since the PCR tests look for RNA, there is no proof that it detects a virus. Furthermore, there is no proof that the virus causes diseases. He asserts that the data is being interpreted to benefit the viral theory, and there is zero concern for false positive results. He concluded that the medical papers are propaganda to increase panic. He continues, the world is suffering from a massive delusion based on the belief that the test from the RNA is a test for the deadly new virus, a virus that has been emerged from wild bats in China, supported by the Western assumption that Chinese people will eat anything that moves. If the virus exists, then it should be possible to purify viral particles. From these particles, RNA can be extracted and should match the RNA used in this test. Until this is done, it is possible that the RNA comes from another source, which could be the cells of a patient, bacteria, fungi, etc. There might be an association with the elevated levels of RNA and illness, but that is not proof that the RNA is from a virus. Without purification and characterization of a virus's particles, it cannot be accepted that the RNA test is proof that the virus is present. Mr. Crown mentioned false positives, and there is a shocking new look at the Chinese Pacific paper that calculated the false positives for the asymptomatic patients as, and then it goes on to, wait for it, 80%. And here's a scientific study published less than 2 weeks ago that shows just under 50% false positives. So is this really a pandemic, or are people panicked based on a test which is producing anywhere from 50 to 80% false positives? Medical martial law? In times of crisis, it's uncommon for the citizens to willingly give up their rights in the name of safety and the greater good. The coronavirus scare is no exception. Around the world, tens of millions of people have been placed under quarantine. Since the outbreak of the virus a few months ago, government officials have exercised unprecedented authority to monitor and to detain citizens. The effort to control media coverage has reached a fevered pitch, and there doesn't seem to be any sign that the nanny state is going anywhere soon. The efforts to quarantine those suspected of carrying the coronavirus seems to have had little effect on its global transmission. Nevertheless, millions of people in China and around the world have been put into lockdown. These people are confined to their homes, ships, or temporary quarantine zones with no due process. And although you may expect this kind of authoritarian response in communist China, the West is facing similar detention efforts. In New York, thousands of people are currently under quarantine. Although New York's the city Mayor Bill de Blasio claims that most of the quarantines are voluntary, many of them aren't. We saw during the measles epidemic last year that Mayor de Blasio had no problem with violating the freedom of American citizens when he tried to force unvaccinated families to receive their shots. Although the New York governor tried to assure reporters that there is no plans to quarantine New York City amid the corona outbreak, Mayor de Blasio said in an interview on CNN that we're absolutely considering that. We're going to look at other options, but it could get to that for sure for the whole country. San Francisco has already implemented such a quarantine. Officials said six San Francisco Bay areas issued a sweeping shelter-in-place mandate Monday, affecting nearly 7 million people, ordering residents to avoid any unnecessary travel by any method and only leave their homes for food, medicine, and exercise. But it's an emergency. The Constitution of the United States is a law for rulers and people, equally in war and equally in peace, and covers with the shield of its protection of all classes of men at all times under all circumstances. Ex parte Milligan, U.S. Supreme Court, 1866. Today, the coronavirus panic gives government fuel to cover for its assaults on the freedom and possesses a question the government does not want to answer. If liberty can be taken away in times of crisis, when is it really liberty? Or is it just a licensed VIA, a temporary government permission slip, subject to the whims of the politicians in power? The government has no authority to dictate to how many people choose to congregate any peaceful purpose. Our First Amendment states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or forbidding the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press of the right of the people to peacefully to assemble. Telling people not to attend church is a violation of the constitutional clause forbidding of free exercise thereof. Telling people they cannot gather in groups of more than 20 or 30 or whatever arbitrary number is clear violation of the constitutional clause, no law forbidding the right of people to peacefully to assemble. The coronavirus or any other emergency does not cancel and negate the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We have far more fear from big government tyranny than we do from any virus. Moreover, liberty is natural and personal. You can sacrifice yours, but you can't sacrifice mine. The good news is there are natural ways for you to fight off viral infections and keep your immune system healthy, one of them which is vitamin C, which is currently being used in China against the COVID-19 corona and has been officially recommended by the Shanghai government. The coronavirus can be dramatically slowed or stopped with the immediate widespread use of high doses of vitamin C. Physicians have demonstrated the powerful antiviral action of vitamin C for decades. There has been lack of media coverage of this effective and successful approach against the virus in general, and the coronavirus in particular. Is vitamin C a cure for coronavirus? The reality is that there is no cure for coronavirus or any other virus for that matter. We are exposed to literally thousands of harmful viruses each and every day, but with a functioning immune system and intake of natural antivirals, we shouldn't have anything to worry about, including coronaviruses. So, and then it just goes on. There's quite a bit more of the read of it, but I thought that you'd find that interesting. Gives a bit of a read on what the actual evidence is in the past, etc., and what the actual's going on right now. You can see that it's just a illusion that's being created, or like I said, for the COVID-19, a cooperated video simulation. And at the end of it, what they're hoping is the virus that spreads is the actual fear. The fear that the idea of the whole world going into lockdown and being controlled gives you. And then when you get that fear, you break down. And then when you break down, you become more vulnerable. So